Okay, take that off there. Okay, there we go. Okay, once again, we have started our river gathering. This is a very special day with the National Indigenous Peoples Day here in Canada. And we've had some special guests joining us this past week, but we have more guests coming in today, and we are very, very happy that we the technology is able to bring people from all over Turtle Island. So it's an opportunity for us to discuss the issues of the day, but it's also, as we discussed with other people, it's our home fires that are most important and the status of our home fires. Where are we at today with our uh, bundle of rights that have been ascertained through inherent recognition of our rights and responsibilities, our treaty rights and responsibilities, our constitutional definitions and place in our country. But most importantly, it's our relations amongst ourselves, us as our communities have been intertwined between many nations. It's our rivers connect us from the Cree, Dene, and Métis nations, our inherent rate nations, traditional nations of the North. But then we go to the east, and there's more nations to the west, to the south, and to the north. And the rivers tie us together. And the symbolism is that if we start the flow, as small a flow or small an idea it is, that if more people come onto it, the power and the strength of the river and the flow is going to happen. So we start these events and these meetings with a prayer, and we're honored today that we were being joined by former chief of Little Pine Cree Nation, Wayne Sumaganis, has joined us. Wahio Tipi Peak Sweet, but it brings us closer together when we use this technology. So Wayne, if at all possible, to start our gathering today on June 21st, on a full moon, on a summer solstice. Summer's beginning. This is a very sacred time of the year, ceremonial time of the year. If you could grace us with your prayers or your thoughts, uh, we'll give you the floor. Matisa Kiego, Pitaguatsimo.
Pues, ikan nga nanas kumagutaw ino isagaw migwa. Muta kawi namskutiga nutskagi isaga mustagi goy tagok tuskeon utami. Muni nanto na tuskeon magapmatsun gawas kawi tutami. Tahi itagap ma watigo mi ino wan igan yoga wan sintik. Mutaga yo nutskawi Emma rimotsigmitet mo ekskita tanski go gis pasigunami. Mamoni gan poga patita gagi simon ko tawin og mo tay go tansi gis paksem go. Eu wala ma magagiwe to temiam pixkon matsun gagi simon. Ega wa ka wan sinya okse wis gagi smotataman maga nigan naga simon go itamo ga sino ki go mo ma gagi smotataman. I thank the Creator for giving us this day. And I'm going to have a prayer in my language for all the people that are listening today and all the many issues that are going to be discussed, because there are so many people today that we're all feeling very, very lost and struggling with all the issues that are facing us. And we need to get back to a foundation so that we can build start building in again to re-strengthen our place in society where the Creator has put us. And a lot of the things that we need to understand is why are we here and how do we move ahead? Creator gave us that sacred responsibility to live life in a certain way. And that is what we have to get back to, is that sacredness of life. Too much nowadays is dominated by money, by the economy, by possessions. And we're getting dragged along in that lifestyle, and that's why we struggle so much. And the reason that we're pushed to the side is we own the right to this land, to those natural resources, to the waters, to the air, and we're being destroyed because somebody wants to get rich over that. And right now we're just being dragged along, and we have to find a way to get back to that. So those are the things that I'm going to pray for, is for that sacred way of thinking, that sacred acknowledgement of our responsibility to the future generations before way too far, before we lose all ties and all connections to how our elders wanted us to live and how the Creator put us on this earth to live. So I'm going to say this prayer in my language. Ano tawinan nanaskom tanas iminako takis ka miya nanaskomanan tiksko negimiya tansigais tutta tansigais wakomta magegagis mustamoga yogatagang loa kumagana ni gwista gimiya tikskon to agan stoimskik Rotska isiga gawi mamopaya gawi ay mutsiga kaniga nasta wanam mamtunesigan no tawinan tanso tegis baktinya yogi goy patino apata mai go matawa igo soka igo ganata tawinan itinan gams kama music matsun e ganata matsun exewa tap matsun dosim sina nektansigo gis asuna mo kagis mi out ninan is wasko ito map matsun tawinan anotska gis gak magno nan witinan exewatsya Within go eskamam tanitama, within go ita to skito, exation to tamata no tawinan, tumagi tawnan, ay.
Thank you, Chief. And we're joined here by Gerald Morin as well. Gerald is a former president of the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan and has worked tirelessly on the rights and programs and services of our communities and the evolution of claims and also our rightful place as the litigation and laws are translated. We're also waiting on to be joined with Chief Willie Littlechild. So his work at the United Nations and Truth and Reconciliation. So Wayne, as part of this, as we talked about where we're at today in 2024, and the word that you used was a state of the union or the state of our home fires. What do you see? Where do we stand here? What are the opportunities? What are the challenges? And it's a sacred role, as you mentioned, but it's also our obligation. Kia no po te tu tamasua, mui o ekpi tus te mamsi totoa. Tanse kuhtsapa tinigan magia. On a very special day like this today, what kind of words would you like to share with our people to inspire or to warn them of the possible dangers that lay out there?
Well, there is. Everything we're facing today is a danger. Our languages, our existence, our Mother Earth, our children, our child raising, our future. The future of the world is at stake. And what got us to that such a dangerous place today is that capitalist way of life where There is no value to anything unless money is acknowledged. That is what the greatest problem facing all of Mother Earth. And how do we get our leaders, our youth? We always talk about our youth as future leaders, but you know, the way we're educating them now, we're not doing them any great favors at all. We're doing a great disservice to our own future. I think we really need to step back as Indian people. Indian and Métis people are relatives. And we need to work together. We need to think together. We need to stop this crazy ride that we're on and say, hey, this is acknowledge that we're not getting anywhere good. And how do we get back to that good place in life? We need to get back and acknowledge the sacredness of all life. Our waters, our lands, our air, everything is threatened now. Was it ever like that before the white man got to Turtle Island? This was a very clean, wonderful place to live. In all the years we were a hunting-gathering society, there's never once an acknowledgement of any species going extinct. But since the white man got here, how many species of animals and people have gone extinct? So how do we protect that? How do we provide continued way of a good, solid, clean life, a sacred life? We look at the education that we receive now. We look at the leaders that are sitting in leadership. None of them have been taught about treaties. None of them have been taught about the sacred view of treaties. And way too many of them have been educated away from their language, their relationship, their place on this world as put to us through the Creator's blessings. I look at meetings that occur and there are no chiefs there. And why are there no leaders there? We need to get back to that leadership that truly represented us. We need to have strength. We need to be united. There is just way too much that's missing. And this is all through, this is what the government has intended from day one. Fracture us in every way possible. And we are allowing it. And we need to recognize what is wrong here. And we need to admit that we need to fix ourselves. Like I said in my prayer, for my prayer, there are so many things that need to be addressed. But who is addressing any of these things? You have the AFN, you have the FSIN, you have other provincial organizations, you have tribal councils. They are not doing anything for us. And it's not an attack on anybody. They themselves can fix themselves as entities if they approach it through a sacred viewpoint. They're not, we don't have chiefs because of the Indian Act. We have chiefs because that was the Creator's way of providing solid leadership. Now, if you look at those chiefs in the past, before treaty, they were chiefs because they had spiritual guidance. They had a great worldview. They were kind. They were generous. Were smart. They never had elections. People would get together and say, that is the best man to lead our community, and that's all there was to it. That's where the term Okimao comes from. And the term Ogimakan came from the time when the Indian Act elections were forced upon us, because it was a way of making us fight every 2 years for that paid position. Why don't we go back to that sacred way of acknowledging that this is the best person to lead our people? Especially now where we are. We can have lots of meetings. I've been to lots of treaty meetings, but I have rarely ever seen more than 4 or 5 chiefs at those treaty meetings. So there's a lot for us to go back to. But the thing we really need to get back to is a sacred way of looking at why we are here. The sacred way of relating to everything around us, to the land, to the water, to the wildlife, to the plant life. We don't even have that relationship anymore. And what's stopping us from going back to that relationship? So, like I said, we need to have State of the Union meeting of all Indian people and acknowledge where we're at and all define where we need to go. And I shouldn't just say Indian, I should also say Métis people, because those Métis people are Métis because they have Indian blood. They're not Métis because they have white blood. And we need to acknowledge that they are our relative. We need to acknowledge that we are not enemies, that we should be sitting together. And it's a hard topic for some people, because when treaty was signed, it was signed with the Indian people, but at the same time, there were already Métis children. Well, those children have every right to a treaty right. The thing that people worried about was that one white parent. Well, that one white parent was white. He couldn't have treaty rights. Those children, from my viewpoint, because of how my grandma raised me, they have every right to the treaty rights, because my grandmother said the Creator gave me grandchildren, not policy, not legislation, not Indian affairs. So we have to learn to think like the elders, who acknowledge who their relative was. And we have to acknowledge it from a sacred viewpoint, not from money. We're afraid that they'll take some of our money away. No, we shouldn't think like that, because as poor as we were, when people came to visit, my grandmother would treat everybody the same. She didn't just give her family the most and just a sandwich to the visitors. We treated them all like family. And that's where we have to go back to, that caring, sharing way of life, where we all acknowledge each other. So there is a huge task here in front of us, and who is going to address it? And we all need to acknowledge it. But when are we going to start doing that? When it's too late? Well, we do a lot of healing ceremonies, and a lot of sick people come there for medicines. And the most disturbing part of all of that for me is they will try everything else. And when that everything else doesn't work, and then they come to the Indian way when it's too late. And then when it doesn't heal them, they say, see, it's bullshit, it's hocus pocus. No, it isn't. If you had come early enough, that Indian medicine would have cured you. But there's the way we've been educated, where what we have as Indian people is useless, it has no value, it has no place. Well, if nothing we had was of value, and why do we exist as a race in spite of everything we've lived through? So there is a lot that needs to be looked at, but who is going to do the teaching? Because those leaders today that we have are all colonized. Those educated people that we have today are all educated to think of things from the white man's perspective. Well, what has gotten us to this dangerous place in life today is that white man's perspective, that white man's way of living. So are we going to wait until it's too late and then blame it and say, it wouldn't have worked? I don't believe so. I've sat in many healing ceremonies. I've sat in many treaty meetings, and we're allowing ourselves to be dragged to our doom. So meetings like this, discussions like this, should be going out to the greatest number Indian and Métis people, so that we can get understanding of who we are and what we have and what our responsibilities are, instead of waiting for a white savior, instead of waiting for a miracle. Those are the things that are facing us today, and we need to start addressing them.
With I guess today being a National Indigenous Peoples Day, this concept that you're saying, State of the Union of our nations, have you seen a gathering or a call for all our nations to come together to discuss this? Like under Section 35, we're recognized as the Inuit, the First Nations, and the Métis. But you have all the different nations from the East Coast to West Coast to the North to the South, the prairies. There's different tribes and nations. That call, is it time that we gather together on our, as nations, as the State of the Union that you talk about?
Well, for me, Section 35 is another way of showing their dominance over us. We need to get back to that spirit and intent of treaty. That spirit and intent of treaty defined our place here, our purpose, our way of living. We don't need the white governments to acknowledge us anymore. We need to learn to acknowledge the Constitution that made Indians. It wasn't policy and legislation. The Creator made us. We need to get back to that way of thinking that we have our responsibility to define ourselves, to protect ourselves, to make sure that we can sustain ourselves. Why are we looking at their acknowledged calendar by the white man's policies and legislations? Why are we being governed by Robert's Rules of Order? When I go pray in the sweat lodge or in a ceremonial lodge, grandfathers don't tell me what does Robert's Rule of Order say. They don't know that book in the sweat lodge. They know the sacred way of looking at things, and that's what we follow. So why do we limit ourselves? Why do we pigeonhole ourselves to such a low place in Canada, in the world? We need to be sacred again. So we need to set our own dates. Like when they signed treaty, Indians of the time took their time at come there until they were ready to sign it, till they defined it themselves, what needs to be in there, what do we need to protect, what do we need to look at. It wasn't a rush deal. They prayed together. It was always prayer first. And they looked at Mother Earth. They looked at the Creator. How are we today responsible for what the Creator gave us to protect? How are we protecting water, the air? We're not. I am very disappointed when we say under Section 35 of the Constitution. Is that all we have? Texas? That's all we're going to follow? Me, I don't care about Section 35. I never mention it. I never fall back on it. I always go to my sacred treaty rights, the spirit and intent of treaty as defined by our elders, by our leaders of the day, not today's watered down versions. I worry about even my son, but they're being taught in school about truth and reconciliation. They're being asked questions on truth and reconciliation, what it means, where it'll take us. And they're being graded on these things. And who is this person that's doing the grading of their courses? When truth and reconciliation, nobody wants to talk about the truth. They all want to talk about reconciliation, but nobody can even agree on what reconciliation really means. Well, the truth of the matter is they're throwing money at us away from everything that we've gone through. People were murdered. Families were destroyed. People starved to death. People were denied an equal place. That's the truth here. So they're going to give us some money. That's their problem. That's their solution to everything that they do wrong. They'll take it. And these are out-of-court settlements. Why are we allowing crime to settle out of court? We're allowing ourselves to be bribed for our murdered relatives. Quality, our stolen languages, destroyed languages, our way of life. Are we for sale? That's what I see. We allow ourselves to be bought off on everything. So there is a lot that has to be talked here. And it's getting time to a point in time where do we hear this? Who's talking? Why do we need to have a special these things? Why do we need to have a calendar to address these things? Why do we need a committee to address these things? Why do we need the white government to protect us? Talk about warriors. Where are our wars? There's a lot that we need to get at. We need to start. But if I go to a chief's meeting, nobody wants to hear that. I've heard a lot of people say that, or that's Magnus again, talking like he knows everything. Well, I don't know everything, but I try and make sure that I'm as educated as I can be on behalf of our Indian people. That's why I was a chief. It's a sacred responsibility. I didn't get elected and buy myself a headdress so people can see me. I was given my headdress to Sundance elders in a special ceremony. And I didn't plan it. I was asked to come to the ceremony, and I didn't know what it was about till I got there. That's how sacred things were through our elders, through our spiritual ways. Leadership is sacred, and we have to start treating it like it's sacred. We have to start acting like it's sacred. And leaders have to be acting in a sacred way, living and leading in a sacred way, not in a way that's governed by Section 35 or Robert's Rules of Orders. Go back to our ways. We need to do.
Yeah, we're talking to former Chief Wayne Samaganus. And Wayne, your perspectives of how correcting that relationship with the Crown and our responsibilities. It's, the responsibility of us, the inherent rights, the treaty rights, and the knowledge our side of as treaty partners. But we're not giving up anything. We're supplementing our Canadian responsibilities and rights. we have to uphold our own indigenous languages, our ways of teaching, our ways of knowing. And Wayne, is there, I guess, what would you call right now if we had a chance to correct things or to call on these leaders? What is it that you would say to all the leaders if we had a chance for them to listen to all of us right now?
Come home and be our chief. Come home and be a sacred Indian that the Creator put you here to be. But acting like it's the white man's rules that made you a chief. Look at what it means to be a chief. What are the roles and responsibilities of a chief as given to us through our elders' teachings, through our ceremonies? Let's be real once again. This is not to point a finger at one individual. Just to be back on that path so we quit being ashamed of being Indians. Because that's how it was when we went to school. You weren't allowed to talk. You weren't allowed to wear braids. You weren't allowed to acknowledge your relatives. You weren't allowed to pray the way we were taught to pray. Come back to who we were as the Creator wanted us to be. Instead of being that weak person with no rights, no hope, no power, no authority. Because that's where our chiefs are right now. They're too busy on that misled path of money. So that's what I would tell any chief anywhere. Sit with your elders. Sit with your spiritual people. Rediscover who you were really meant to be. We all need to do that.
Sorry, I was muted there. It's National Indigenous Peoples Day 2024, and we're calling on all people to share their ideas of the state of our home fires, on the obligations we have as Indigenous peoples to our families, to our communities, to our home fires, but also the obligations that are made through our treaty, and to strengthen our country, to make sure that we have a proper place in governing ourselves and governing the country as well, and the responsibility we have with the relations we have with Mother Earth and all the relations of the beings on Mother Earth. And we can't let those go and we can't sell those off. It's something that it's an obligation, it's a responsibility. Today we're talking with Wayne Sumaganis. We're being joined with Gerald Morin from the Métis Nation. We're waiting on Willie Littlechild to log on, but I also have Pearl Callahayson has joined me on Facebook. Pearl, can you hear me? Oh.
Yes, I can. But I can hear you.
We were thinking that you would join us tomorrow, or did you want us to hook you up?
The sports, right?
Yes, the Arctic Winter Games, and how Northern Saskatchewan could be a part of it. Northern Alberta is a team. We wanted to see the experience that you had and how to organize this. So if you come on tomorrow, that'd be definitely perfect timing between 1 and 4 tomorrow.
Through all sorts of grads, but tomorrow's Saturday, so I might be able to join you. So I can come on then. It's really good to hear everybody. I was listening in, and it was nice to hear that. So, Rick, I'll talk to you tomorrow.
That way. Thank you, Pearl.
Hi.
Hi. That was Pearl Callahayson just confirming that she'll be joining us tomorrow we had invited her to share the experience of Northern Alberta on how they achieved in getting their teams to enter the Arctic Winter Games, an international sporting event. And Northern Saskatchewan is itself a circumpolar event. So, Chief Wayne, I guess in the sports world, you mentioned the leadership world, but we also have the Oilers are on a Stanley Cup run, but the importance of athletics, and you mentioned the Warriors, but being physically fit, mentally fit, spiritually fit. How do you see this opportunity for us to work in the athletic world? You've seen the North American Indigenous Games. You've seen some of our hockey teams coming together and achieving into the NHL status. But there's a lot of athletics, but that was also traditional games as well, like lacrosse. But these are health. These are also I guess ways of ambassadorship. You're dealing between communities and you're competing with other people from other nations, but it's it's all inclusive. I think athletics is a part of our Indigenous heritage as well, right?
Yeah, it's we've always lived a very active lifestyle. Everything we did to stay alive every day, to eat, you had to go and look for food. You had to go hunting. You had to go picking. You had to harvest. Everything was about doing something for yourself. And if you look at everything that we're facing today, how sick of us, a people that we are, all the diseases that we face, and we see so many youth today with mental issues, so many youth suicides. You know, how awful of a life we must be giving our youth, that death is preferable over life. So it's very important for us to go back to all those healthy ways of living. You know, when I was a young boy, I didn't have a father. My mother was hardly ever home because of what she went through in residential school. Our grandmother raised us. And if it hadn't been for certain adult males and uncles on our community that made sure that we played sports, that we were active, I don't know where I'd be. And I give thanks to Tony Cody for his vision in starting the Saskatchewan Indian Summer Games. And I was an athlete at those very first Saskatchewan Indian Summer Games. And forever after that, when I became a leader, if I saw him somewhere, I would go and shake his hand and thank him for starting those games. Because there are so many youth that that's all we have is organized sports, because we have so many families that are not whole. And if we don't have community initiatives to save people, you know, for sure we would be even worse off. So there's so much benefit to all the organization that we need to do, and sports is certainly one of them. I'm very active in organizing sports events for my sons and their friends. And you talk about the Edmonton Oilers. I just finished my Sundance this Sunday. I 8 Sundance that I've done. They're saying, Steve, say a prayer for the Oilers. You know, we like to joke and we like to laugh, even at our most sacred ceremonies, because we enjoy, and this is one of the benefits of treaty, is that we can enjoy the best of both worlds. That's what treaty gives us. We need to acknowledge those things. So, sports, spirituality, you know, it really helps enrich our way of life, and it gives us better health. Because my wife is just going through nursing school, and she's so happy she just finished passing her tests, and she only has a little bit more to go till she's an LPN, a licensed practical nurse. And because of where I sat as the chairman of a lot of those boards, I know the health issues that we are facing as a people. So from where I've sat, I've seen so many things that make me worry. And yes, we are taking little steps here and there. Do you know in Saskatchewan, yet we have 130,000 Indians in Saskatchewan, but do we have an Indian hospital? No, we don't. And why is it we don't have an Indian? These are the things that we need to for. There's no public transportation in Saskatchewan. People from the remote community is going to go to the hospital to the doctor when there's no more family doctors. There's a lot that needs to be addressed. So that we do not become sick. We could be becoming more active, going back to that traditional way of life. You and I were in Pine House at their traditional elders gathering, and we saw people preparing fish, cutting moose meat, caribou, adding hides. We saw elders being looked after by hairdressers, by nurses, getting your blood pressure taken, your blood sugar checked. It was a way of a whole healthy community coming together and highlighting that our way of life is so healthy and so caring and so sharing. That's what I saw at Pine House, Métis community. But even though it was a Métis community, most everybody there spoke Cree. And I was very happy to be there because people were so welcoming. Even though I didn't know very many of them, everybody talked. Exchanged medicines. How do you do this? We bartered. We traded knives. It was just a great way of life, a community way of life, a traditional way of life. So there's a lot that we see, but we need to go back. Like I said, go back to that sacred life. Where we're at now, we certainly need it.
Yes, as you mentioned, the health statistics are showing, our higher incidence of everything: hospitalization, suicide, addictions, incarceration. We're on the leading statistics of all the bad news that we want to see as a society. And your words are enlightening to hear that, it's up to us. It's born on us. But our leaders have to be standing with us, have to be in working together as well. The leaders amongst themselves have to be working together, so there's a united effort to make the colonial policies, to revert those, to reconcile those, to correct the wrongs. There's a lot of work. You can hear it in your voice that it's not done, but there's hope that we can take it there, right?
Yes. Yeah. Always. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to ask Gerald to join us, Wayne. I don't know if you can stay with us for a while or you'll listen in, but
I'm listening. Yeah.
I'm going to call on Gerald Morin to join us. Gerald is from Aguago-Pio-Sagahigan, Green Lake. He's played a role as a Métis leader and has been trained in the legal profession, so he understands the legislation that's taken place and also what the present lay of the land is. So I guess in terms of status of our home fires, Gerald, you've heard. Wayne and the prayers and the hope
Uh-huh.
that's there, how we can work together. Maybe share some
Yes.
ideas of what you have here.
Well, tanto yagi o boy me tinin to tatago, and the Rick, you for many years now you've been organizing many events. I was just sitting here as Wayne was talking, and hello Wayne. I you used to organize that music event in Bovell many years. You had Doug Kershaw down there. Boy, gimamu tigita na man you sky yakti. Nanu squeeze yakisiga. Gimutsigan money, that's it's excellent that you're bringing people together like this. I think it's a very good thing whenever we can sit down and have dialogue and create understanding, especially between First Nations and Métis, and the Win kay si Peak Street, and he's absolutely right in Mawakutuon, and Stamiwan Megipita man from a friend of mine, biscuit, gisikas man, biscuit man gisigatan, and I Bill Crow, William Crow, his real name. Kipunip Matsu ni Tioagan from down south. I and many times manini Stangi with Tiwan, one of my best friends was Dennis Ahenecu. He used to be a veteran man. Kipunip Matsu I used to take him around to different events, and Biscuit used to tag along, and other people. Why we used to talk about these different issues, and exactly what Wayne was talking about, and I think that's a very good thing, and I think we have to come together more often, We're just I think one of the problems in life too, we're isolating ourselves too much, Misa to ano tani ginakyap yan stay why and gaskita mapin mana and it's just so nice to be sitting here and talking to you guys, and hearing your voices and seeing your faces. Going me awesome you one man. I stand me with you. Big squat of Alma. So I don't know, Rick. I don't know what you want me to speak on specifically, but thank you for inviting me, and I'm very happy to be part of the event.
Yes, thank you, Gerald. I know what your experience with leadership and your legal profession has taken you to knowledge on some of the land claims that we've made. There's the Northwest Métis land claim. I think there was
Yeah.
two of them launched. So you got kind of
Uh-huh.
clarity on that. What's happening? What's the status in that
Okay.
area? And then you
Sure.
also have the latest change with MNS pulling out of Bill C-53 and
Mm-hmm.
Métis Federation of Manitoba Métis Federation is seeking its own treaty
Mm-hmm.
as table. Is
Uh-huh.
that what the Saskatchewan Métis are doing as well? Just kind of give us an
Mm-hmm.
update on that front.
Okay. Sure. Well, excuse me. I'll talk about the launching of the land claim, which was done many years ago. It was back on April 1st of 1994. Uxbee, I was president of the Métis Nation, Saskatchewan Uxbee, and also the national president. Back in those days, the national presidency was a part-time position. It was occupied by one of the provincial presidents, and before me, it was Yvon Dumont. He was president of the Manitoba Métis Federation, Uxbee Maga. He was appointed as lieutenant governor for the province of Manitoba by Prime Minister Mulroney Uxbee. So after he left, I was elected as the national president. So during that time in 93, 94, 95, that time period, we launched a Métis Nation test case. Initially, we were talking about claiming the entire Métis homeland in Western Canada, but our lawyers had advised us it wasn't a good way to approach because because of logistical issues would be very expensive. The evidence you would have to obtain to show traditional occupancy and stuff like that. So they advised that we pick an area in the Métis homeland where we would launch a test case where we would be allowed to put our best foot forward on behalf of the Métis Nation and the Métis homeland. So we had chosen northwestern Saskatchewan as that test case area. Why the Métis Nation Saskatchewan and the Métis National Council were the primary plaintiffs. There were 34 plaintiffs in all. There were the two area directors at the time for those. There's 12 regions that make up the M&S governance structure. 12 regions throughout Saskatchewan. And there's two regions that fall in northwestern Saskatchewan. I think Northern Region 2 and Northern Region 3. Buffalo Narrows, which goes all the way up to essentially the Saskatchewan NWT border, and then you have Isla Cross, Pine House, Beauval, Green Lake, which is Northern Region 3. And Max Morin and Norman Hansen Nooksby were the area directors, so they were added as plaintiffs, and all the local presidents in those two regions. And we had added some elders, Mina. So in all, there were 34. Most of those individuals, we've met Swogiwanos today. There's still a few of us that are still alive. And basically, what we're claiming in that land claim court action is declaration that we have existing and subsisting Métis Aboriginal title to land and resources based on traditional use. And one of the reasons we had picked northwestern Saskatchewan is because there's many communities out there like Isla Cross, Beauval, Pine House, Green Lake, which have been around for as settlements for a long time. And people in that area, in that area, and they live a very traditional lifestyle. Even today, many of them do hunting, fishing, trapping, gathering medicines, like. So basically a declaration of existing and subsisting right to land and resources based on traditional use. Also a declaration that we have the inherent right to govern our own affairs in those regions, within those communities, and harvesting rights, a declaration to harvesting rights, hunting and fishing and aksisa. So that was on April 1st, 1994. But the thing is, with declarations, you're not asking for compensation. You're not asking for anything in particularly when you're asking for a declaration in a court action. It's just basically exactly what it says is a declaration. That's what's a matune spot nakanduni po. Then it comes deep in and say, here, hey, we have, the right to traditional land use. So basically, that's what it is in a legal format in the courts. It's a declaration that we have these things. And essentially, declarations as a remedy in court actions are to put pressure on the governments to come to the bargaining table to negotiate with us a settlement on lands and resources, inherent right to self-government, harvesting rights in northwestern Saskatchewan. And, another reason we call it a test case is because the script system was what was used to address our rights. That little piece of paper that said we had 160 acres of land, 240 acres, or $160 money script or land script. And of course, it was a very fraudulent system. In northwestern Saskatchewan, for example, when the script was given out in many instances, there was, the closest land titles office, maybe North Battleford, maybe go back a little further, was even in Moose Jaw, and you could only claim with money script or with land script, you could only claim surveyed land. So a lot of the lands that were surveyed were down in places like Moose Jaw and Regina. The land wasn't surveyed in northwestern Saskatchewan, uh, Wawisukspi, at the time. And so it just wasn't reasonable to say that we were going to take up our land and based on our land rights. It just goes to show it was designed as a fraudulent system to, on the one hand, acknowledge our rights to lands and resources, but on the other hand, say we're giving it to you. But in the studies that the Métis National Council had done back in the 90s as part of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People's report, we'd been given money to do our own reports and submit to RCAP and so on. We had found that, in most instances, not 97 to 99% of the cases, the land script was not taken up at all. It ended up in the hands of third parties, whether it was land speculators, the church, the banks, homesteaders that had come to Western Canada. It was all advertised. They were all in it together, as who squats. So anyway. And the reason we had the test case is because throughout Western Canada, where we consider to be the Métis homeland, where the Métis evolved as a distinct nation of people with a strong Métis identity, um, um, we were all dealt with by way of script. So our traditional, our inherent right to lands and resources were acknowledged, and we were all dealt with by money or land script. In Manitoba, that was the case. In Manitoba, they had launched somewhat of a similar action in the Winnipeg area prior to that, back in the 1980s. It sat dormant for a long time. They won with that litigation and then was reactivated again, I think, in the late 90s after we had launched. And they've been all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada, and they won their case. And now in Manitoba, they're negotiating a treaty with Canada. Those negotiations are underway. For us in Saskatchewan, we initially pursued legislation through the Métis Nation Saskatchewan with Alberta and Ontario, and but at some point the MNS leadership had withdrew from support for that bill C-53, as you had called it, Rick. And now the Métis Nation Saskatchewan is also negotiating a treaty with Canada. So both the Manitoba Métis Federation and the Métis Nation Saskatchewan are negotiating a treaty. And as part of their process in Manitoba, land rights are included in that treaty process because of their victory in the Supreme Court of Canada. We haven't really moved our claim forward. We haven't even been to trial yet. I'm not sure why that hasn't happened. Like I said, it was launched back on April 1st, 1994. I think currently, they're not really moving forward with it in the courts because I think there have been discussions that have been happening with the federal government. I hear different things. I can't really say for sure where those discussions are at. I'm not involved in those discussions. I'm not privy to what's happening there. Sometimes I hear some good things that the federal government wants to negotiate a land claim agreement with the Métis Nation Saskatchewan rather than moving that litigation forward. That's what I thought. At least the federal Liberal government, that was their mindset on that issue. So it could be that they're moving in that direction. But even like I said, even if we ever get to the higher courts or the Supreme Court of Canada, again, we would be seeking a declaration, which ultimately would send us back to the negotiating table in any event. And maybe that's what's happening with their treaty negotiations right now with the Métis Nation Saskatchewan. I'm sure that litigation, that land claim court action, and the whole issue of land and resources is in the mix as part of their discussions with Canada as part in pursuing that treaty with the Métis Nation Saskatchewan. When it comes down to it, there's also the final thing I want to say about that, I guess, Rick, and then if anybody has any questions or would like to discuss it, when that day arrives, and that's our ultimate objective, where we want to be at the negotiating table, and I'm sure any discussions that the MNS is having right now is not at that stage in any event. But when the time comes when we're in the thick of the negotiations on a land claim agreement with the Métis Nation, Saskatchewan, Canada, I don't think Saskatchewan is at the table, unfortunately. Ultimately, because most of the land in Saskatchewan is encumbered, it's there's private interests on it. Even in northern Saskatchewan, there's forest management lease agreements, there's private leases, and so on. In the south, most of it is taken up as fee simple. In any event, I mean, any settlement would be similar to the TLE process, I guess, that had taken place in Saskatchewan, in that. Any settlement would have to involve, I would think, probably about 90% compensation in any event, and maybe 10% land transfers, such as Batoche, maybe South Bay and Palm Bear and places like that, or some of our communities in northwestern Saskatchewan. Um, and then that money would have to be used to buy land. And then there would have to be special provisions in the land claim agreement that if the Métis buy land, then that's considered to be Métis land. We don't own it simply in fee simple, because that's a more limited, a lower level of land ownership as far as I'm concerned, because in fee simple, the underlying title belongs to the Crown. So there's no really transfer of land to the Métis if the underlying title remains with the Crown, which is the case with fee simple. I'm not. Maybe Wayne, you might know more about what happened in that TLE process, what the contents of the agreement were, or how it worked exactly. But in any event, any settlement, like I said, would have to involve primarily money, and land that's set aside as Métis land would have to be recognized as Métis land, and similar to what the First Nations did, maybe we'd want to buy land closer to urban centers strictly for business purposes, so we can raise our own revenue for our own purposes, and that's about it, I think, Rick. I don't know if I've missed anything out. You know, like I said, the MNS is similar to the MMF at this point. They're now negotiating a treaty with Canada. Uh, there's a draft treaty there. I think I arrived a little late to that the Métis Nation legislative assembly that happened most recently. Wayne was there before I got there, but I think the day before the MNLA actually started, or before the public was allowed into the meeting, they had sort of an in-camera session, a whole day, to talk about that treaty. Because many of the provisions at this point are confidential. And then once they're able to initial it, I guess then it becomes a public document, and then it would be up for public discussion. And then ultimately, the Provincial Métis Council would have to ratify any treaty, the Métis Nation Legislative Assembly. I think they're also entertaining the idea of a referendum with Métis people on adoption of that treaty. So they're not there at that point, but I think there's actually a document, a draft treaty there that they're negotiating with Canada. But as far as I'm concerned, that land issue has to be front and center in any negotiations on a treaty. And that's basically where it's at. It's important that we move in this direction, because as it stands, we're a landless people. We don't have a land base, and I think if we're going to secure our future for our young people, for our children, grandchildren, future generations, it's very important that the land that we have a land base. That's the only way we're going to have any power or be able to control our destiny in the future, and really empower ourselves and be in a position, I think, to minimally to be enjoying the same standard of living as other Canadians enjoy as well. So it's engaged on for now, Rick, and if anybody wants to talk about it, has any questions, I'll be happy to be part of those discussions.
Just the one question that I have, in the Métis Constitution, there's reference to a Northwest Métis Council.
Uh-huh.
I thought that was part of the dialogue that's required for a land claim or for self-government. Is that
Mhm.
Constitution? Is it still there? Is that it's not active though, right?
It's active. That's the constitution that the Métis Nation Saskatchewan is following. On December 1st, 1993, before we adopted that constitution, we had bylaws pursuant to the Nonprofit Corporations Act of Saskatchewan. We were a nonprofit corporation falling under the jurisdiction of Saskatchewan under the Nonprofit Corporations Act, and as far as I was concerned, that's a far cry from practicing self-government. So on December 1st of 1993, a few months before we had launched that land claim, we adopted a constitution asserting our inherent right to govern our own affairs. It's one of those bundle of rights that are protected and affirmed in Canadian law, and we've been practicing we've been practicing self-government for many, many years, but unfortunately, to receive funding or even to go to the negotiating table with governments, they had to create these corporate entities under their corporate legislation. Some of them are incorporated federally. We adopted this constitution. We've been practicing it ever since, and so we it's how the Métis Nation Saskatchewan governs itself, and the Northwest Métis Council 6.1 of that constitution was what brought into being the Northwest Saskatchewan Métis Council, and that council is comprised of those two regions that I spoke of earlier, Northern Region 2 and 3. The two area directors co-chair that Northwest Saskatchewan Métis Council, and the local presidents in those two regions are part of the council. They had adopted a constitution after 1993, and they've had meetings from time to time. Those two regions have come together. So they're not involved in the discussions as the Northwest Métis Council at this particular point in time, but those two regions which make up the Northwest Métis Council, Rick, are part and parcel of the discussions that are taking place around the treaty, and also any discussions around the land claim court action, out of court settlement. They're also involved in that as well. So I suppose at some point in time, and it'll be up to them, the Northwest Métis Council, as a council under 6.1 of the Constitution, would be involved in those discussions rather than as the two regions by themselves. So yes and no, they're involved in the discussions that are happening around all those issues.
Yeah, thank you. For people listening on radio, we're talking to Gerald Morin, former president of the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan, also was chairman of the Northern Métis National Council of Canada. And we're talking about the Métis land claims that were launched and also subsequent evolution of where we're at now. And I think it's a treaty negotiations is what is happening now with the Manitoba Métis Federation, and now the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan is seeking the same path towards treaty negotiations. But any questions from any other speakers? Wayne, you want to weigh in or have a question or advice in treaty making, or anybody that's online have any questions for both of our speakers? We had Wayne Smaginus join us, and also Gerald Morin is on the line. So just open up for questions if there's anybody that's. We're joined by Marianne Morin as well, Gerald. So
yeah, hello, Marianne. Oh yeah, well,
And Candace Paul has joined our group now as well. Candace, welcome. Our National Indigenous Peoples Day program here just coincides. It's perfect time to talk about the inherent rights, the treaty rights, the obligations, not only rights, I guess, it's responsibilities as well as Wayne said, it's our, nurturing our families, nurturing our communities. Candace, what's on your mind on
On this topic, what's on my mind is I have the question of the original inhabitants are the First Nations. Should they not be the ones you're negotiating with? They are the ones who are your relatives. They're the true title holders, not Canada, and definitely not the province of Saskatchewan. Should they not, wouldn't your opportunities to strengthen each other be greater if you negotiated with the First Nations rather than with Canada?
Oh, absolutely, I agree. But unfortunately, the reality is it's they consider it to be crown land, and if at the end of the day, if we're going to have any land transfers, or even if the compensation that's going to be set aside for us as part of those discussions, the reality is we must deal with them. But I'm not at all opposed. I totally agree with Wayne. I mean, it's I think it's high time that we start coming together and working together. It's unfortunate that that hasn't happened. I don't fully understand. You said why we don't. I think I know back in 1991, I think it's when it was. At the time, it was Chief Roland Crow of the FSIN, and Jimmy DeRocher was president of the Métis Nation, Saskatchewan. I was provincial secretary of XP, and the late Philip Chartier was the provincial treasurer, and we were involved in negotiations with them on the signing of a protocol agreement between the FSIN and the Métis Nation, Saskatchewan, and we were successful in doing that. Jimmy and Roland had signed a protocol agreement, which was in existence for a number of years, and we had a closer working relationship as a result of that. And uh, I would love to see something like that in place again. You look at my example. I'll give you like my example. I have three daughters, and those three girls are Métis girls. I have five grandchildren, and my five grandchildren are all Treaty Indians. You know, I have a vested interest in ensuring that the rights and interests of Treaty Indian people are addressed going forward into the future, because it's part of my family. It's part of my blood. And me within me na in big school is a big school, and I would love to see that day where in our respective legislative assemblies where we can get the chief of the FSIN to come and address our assembly, and our president to go to the FSIN legislative assembly to go address the chiefs over there, and having, you know, it's long overdue. And all the sentiments that Wayne has expressed, I've heard him speak a number of times. I'm totally in agreement with everything he says. I really strongly support Wayne and the things that he says, really believe in what he's talking about. And I would love for us to come together. Got a lot of great ideas like himself and some of the things that he says. And yes, I totally agree with you. We got to be sitting down and talking to each other more often, that's for sure. I think, Rick, yourself, you've encouraged that over the years. And I think it would be nice to see that come into practice at long last.
I guess the other discussion I would add to that, Candace, thanks for that question. I think that's very significant. We underlie the negotiations with the Crown. It kind of overshadows our inherent responsibilities as amongst our nations.
Yeah.
And treaty making is not a new thing with the Europeans. We had treaties before but we also had confederacies that united nations for common efforts.
Yeah.
So something like a Treaty 10 a few years ago, I guess now the confederacy between the Cree and Dene bands of Treaty 10 have created a unity under Treaty 10. But is that something that the Métis should be looking close to? Is either like if you know the history, Treaty 2 includes the Métis as half-breeds in claiming adhesion to existing treaties. So if the Métis look at adhesion to existing treaties, it strengthens the treaty standing of the existing treaties. You're supplementing. We're standing together. What
Yeah.
Candace said before we go to the crown. We're standing together. If the land is to be set aside for Métis, that it's all agreed on by the Cree and Dene communities of Treaty 10. And when we make a land claim or make a substantial, I'm not sure, occupation of lands, reoccupation, because even the provincial government calls Crown land unoccupied Crown land, but we're still occupying the land up here. There's people utilizing that land and resources on a daily basis for medicines, for subsistence, but also just for therapy. Just to be on the land is a healthy feeling. And when you look at the south and you see all the fences, the Métis were delegated to road allowance at one point, away from surveyed lots. That's a colonial hangover. We want to get rid of that hangover. How do we clear picture? And I think Candace is right. I think we should be sitting together as nations, as our communities together, coming up with a common stance so we can all support each other.
I totally agree with that, because one of my big concerns is the government's going to use this to drive a wedge. To get what they want. I really think there's just a whole lot more power if we stand together.
Yes, and then that's in fact what they have been doing for many, many years, pitting us against one another. Even within our own communities, they do that. And, like you kind of touched on one issue there, Rick, which is also very near and dear to me, like it's not only occupying that land for example, for economic development purposes, or to exploit the resources for our own purposes, whatever, it's provided we respect the land. But one of the at the core of us having control over our traditional territories, or being able to access our traditional territories, is a spiritual component, a very important spiritual component. To me, I see that as the foundation of everything. I want to tell a story which I had told once before at a Métis forum, and the reason I want to share it is because I think it's very consistent with what's being said here right now. Is that a number of years ago, I started having these dreams about the bear, and it's really what's odd to me. I was really very confused about it, because it just was totally almost at the time, as a younger person, almost alien to me, that whole idea, and my first dream about the bear, it came to me, and I actually shot the bear because I thought the bear came there to attack me and my family. And then these dreams kept returning, and the bear kept returning in my dreams. And then I would talk to elders as these dreams were progressing. And this was over the course of 3 or 4 years that this was happening. And over time, from the dreams and from my discussion with elders, I I started to change my attitude a little bit. And I was thinking, well, maybe the bear is not coming there to to attack or for any aggressive nature. Maybe he's coming there for something good, to deliver a good message. Maybe this is a friend, or maybe this is a relative. It kind of brought in a transition within me spiritually as this was going along. It was progressing. As I said, it took a number of years. Finally, I entertained the idea, well, geez, maybe the bear is here for a good reason. And then these dreams kept happening. And then finally, I thought to myself, the bear, I think, is coming here to deliver a positive message. I think he's coming here in friendship, with love, and it's something very important, a very important, very sacred message that he's delivering. And I think, and I was told by the elders, that maybe the bear is your protector and your spirit guide, something like that, and he's there in friendship. So I thought, well, next time I have that bear dream, I'm gonna, you know, I'm probably gonna be walking miskana so many dyan suguti waga mugukta, and then all of a sudden the bear is gonna be there and then all of a sudden this dream happened. And that's exactly how it happened. It's this little trail I was following was very kisagawan made with lots of bush, and it's a sharp curve. And then this is where this huge bear was approaching me. And by the time I see him, he was very close to me. Then he took a few steps forward, and he was like maybe holy smokes. 3 feet away from me, 4 or 5 feet, something like that. But we Gustavo, I wasn't afraid of him because I figured he's here for a good reason. He's here in love, and then he stood up on his hind legs and stopped me. And he stopped me. I was looking up like that, and I was small compared to this big bear, and if he would have fell down, he would have crushed me. But anyway, I'm looking up at him, and and I looked him in the eye, and he looked me in the eye, and I told him, "Look, I understand now, and I love you too, and thank you for coming to me." And he came to. I understand now why you're coming. I understand your Iwakunta, and that you're my relative. I'm part of the bear family. You're my spirit guide, my protector, and thank you so much. And I can't express in words the love, the positive energy that was flowing between us. And Quaisnik, he looking down at me, he looked at me with such love, and for a long time we were in this position, and then finally he gradually went down on all fours, turned around, started walking Samina, and I walked too. I looked back for a moment. I seen him briefly, and at the Mohtil gaps, he's still walking, and then I walked down. We went in opposite directions. Okay, that was the last dream I had about the bear because he had successfully delivered the message in Stuhti, and I understood. And now I honor that spiritually. I was brought up as a Catholic. I practice both ways, my Christianity and First Nation spirituality. I smudge all that stuff. I've been to sweats and so on. I honor both those. There's one creator. We're all children of God. And that special connection to the bear, it's something that I'm very proud of and I really honor. And there's been instances in my life where I've been to some very dark places, especially when I was on the streets for many years, doing drugs and all that stuff. And, you know, even in my own home, I was attacked by evil spirits, and the bear had came to uh, to fight for me. Even took arrows for me, and so that relationship now exists as a result of those dreams, and it's not something I asked for. It happened. It engaged me, and then there's that connection to the animals and the land and that spirituality. It's important for all of us, whether we're First Nations, Métis, or all Indigenous peoples. We're from the land. If we're going to remain whole and we're going to be empowered and we're going to maintain our distinct identities of who we are, we have to have that connection to the land and the animals. We have to honor that, and there's just no other way for us.
Thanks for sharing that story, Gerald.
Mm.
Those are our guides. Sometimes we skip in fear
Mm-mm.
or in in shame sometimes, but
Aha.
urta sukaya and katapujis taminiwan mamyo sin gatsamustoya.
Yeah.
You got a question there, Marianne? Tisa yeah.
Good afternoon,
Nice to
everyone.
see you again on our Aboriginal Day and Indigenous Day.
I was like, oh geez, do I have to look at Gerald? No, I'm just kidding, Gerald. Listening, like when you're talking about the bear, and I've been thinking about like, how we're so having trouble with health and other things and trying to figure out like the math and everything. And like the bear is the medicine bear, and it is a
Mm-hmm.
really big part of our north, right?
Yeah.
So, like I always think about economic development and I think about Bayer aspirin, multi-billions of dollars made from a medicine that the First Nations had provided. And we know some of the other ones too. And like we've got to look at the land as something that we have to protect, something that has to protect us. It's reciprocal. So like when people are looking at our plants and our berries and just thinking it's like weeds or whatever, we have to change that thought. And we also have to like copyright all of this stuff because we can't keep
Mm-hmm.
just letting everybody take what you got and making multi-billions of dollars because it's not only it's Wiggy, it's Wigaswa, it's like it's just everything that is in the north is medicine, and like when you have the beaver huts that has the like the mint right there, and each of those things is so important to our health, especially now.
Mm-hmm.
Like for our children more so than the older people. Now it's our turn to pass it down. It's not our turn to continue to be those keep everything to ourselves. So I know Candace would have some thoughts on the same thing too, and it is right. In history now, like we're having something acknowledged with flying dust that we did have one ancestor that was omitted from the treaty um, um, for some odd reason, probably the 1885 resistance. But they are accepting him again now, so that's good. And his mom, the original name was a bear, her original name.
Mm.
So like listening to Gerald and like you're talking treaties, you're talking all the bigger picture. But those are things you can, like they say, well, as a lawyer, well, we don't have enough money for a lawyer. Well, you know what? We still have a lot of land that we coexist on as First Nations and Métis people with a
Mm.
lot of resources. And companies are having to make those duty to consult agreements with First Nations and Métis people. But there's certain ones that, First Nations and Métis people should come together for. That's the ones that take too much of the climate change and puts too much unhealthiness in the north or even in the south, because I always look at their potash and say they're so proud because we feed the world, but then they use Roundup, cancer causing agent. So maybe we feed the world, but maybe we poison it too. It's something for us to really, really think about.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Marianne.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thank both of you for bringing those thoughts forward, especially today. It's summer solstice.
Mm-hmm.
It's an important spiritual time.
Yeah.
And your bear story reminds me of my real life bear story. When the bear swings at you 4 times across your face and doesn't hit you, it's pretty powerful.
Yes. I would
So
agree.
yeah, right around this time of year, But knowing that, that bear taught me how to pray really hard. And I have so much respect for the land and all of the medicines and all of the things that grow on it. I really hate, I really like what Marianne just said too. There's times when we need to stand up together and say, no, that's enough. Too much.
Yeah.
People see,
Yeah.
And because we have to protect those future generations, and they won't, and we know they won't.
Yeah.
So putting together something together, like, you know, like I've said it a couple times now over the last couple of days, environmental standards that actually do protect the land and do protect our futures, because we can't leave it up to governments. We have to do it. So I really hope, you know, all of this discussion gets us somewhere.
Yes.
Well, as charting our future and knowing where we stand, one of our warriors that has taken on this role is Chief Wilton Littlechild, and he's joined us now. He comes from Musquetees in Alberta, and unless there's a question, and I see Wayne Samaganus maybe logging on. Did you have a question, Wayne, or comment?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. I want to make a ski. If you think back to the treaty, when we put he was, because it was the Indian people that put everything on the table. The white men had nothing to put on there. They came across on ships. How much oil and gas, how much gold did they bring with them? So any oil and gas and gold they have today, they helped them. So we didn't. In treaty, we gave them 6 inches because they wanted to farm. That was their original. And since 6 inches to give up, we agreed to that. And we let them have some wood, some lumber, kawaskay kanigatik to build houses. Magag yogi goy, iskuak, nipia, paskigi. It says in the treaty, whatever the Creator gave you will always be yours. Well, the Creator gave us the fish and wildlife. The Creator, the water. The Creator gave medicines. Those are always going to be ours. So it's very that there's a Ministry of the Environment. There's a Department of Fisheries and Oceans. Where the hell do they get fishes and oceans? This environment was already here. Where did they get acquired? And you talk about the nation challenging for their nationhood, but it's going to be a court battle. Well, why are you trying to risk playing a game against the Canadian government in their own courts? Who gave us nationhood? Otawi did. Why are we asking the Canadian government, the provincial governments, for that recognition? We have to be smart. We have to acknowledge these things. We're going to make legal challenges on these things. Courts, the international courts. We can't. There's no business taking Canada to court. You know what? You're going to beat me up in your own house, and you have that right. We have to learn to look at the big picture of everything, the legality. But how come we're not sitting together, Indian and Métis? From the very beginning, the governments have tried to take away the children from our future. And those Métis children are the very first example. Mamounts. People signed treaties because they were starving to death. There was no buffaloes to hunt, no more. You know, that's the reality of treaty. Even today, when as a chief to sign those funding agreements. He said, well, if you don't sign it, Chief, I don't know if you'll get funding. My council signed it because they were afraid of it. I didn't sign it. I told them, sign it. I say you're signing under duress. You're being forced to sign these things. And you're never a participant in acknowledging that this budget that you're being forced to accept is sufficient. And there's never a real needs assessment what every community needs. So a lot of the things that we see facing us, Indian and Métis, have been a threat for us so long. And I beg you, don't look at things like that. Believe in your strength. Believe in your sacred rights, your sacred obligations, your sacred responsibilities. Don't let the threat of a few dollars being withheld from you hold it back. Ski. Like you said, the lady that said that, the Indian should be sitting with the Métis to talk about that. And that's what I said in my opening comments. We are not each other's enemy. We're relatives. Let's sit together. But who's going to split us? The politicians. Even our very own Indian and Métis politicians will fight because it takes away their little power base, their little perverse view of power. For me, power is something that I can have to help everybody move ahead. It's not power to give me control, give me access to more ahead of everybody else. It's a power to benefit the community. And Indian and Métis politicians, we have learned the cunning of the white man, where we'll try and hang on to that power just to protect the paycheck. And it robs you of your real sacred rights and responsibilities as a leader. So there's a very, very much so a lot to look at. And you know what? We all think the same. We all see the same way. Every one of us that's talking here, we can see that. Why is nobody listening to us? Because we've been conditioned to believe that chiefs and councils and leadership of all levels, that's the greatest thing to be. Well, you know, that's why I'm saying we need to step back. We need to acknowledge who we are and what we have, and take that back to ourselves. Don't let somebody hand it back to us in pieces. It's a very broken system. That's a colonial system. That's the responsibility. But we all need to push to that objective. That's what's missing.
Thank you, Wayne Smaginus, Gerald Moran, for starting the dialogue on the relations between our own nations, our own Dene, Cree. So at this time, I'll like to invite Chief Wilton Littlechild. He's renowned worldwide, but most importantly, in Nihiawatsit. I tapuigi takap matsum nogistano. Tenugways isokupik swistamagit kenogte. At the United Nations, at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Chief Littlechild, we're in a discussion on relations of the Manitoba Métis Federation, and also the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan is seeking treaty-making processes with the Crown. But first and foremost, the relationship between our nations has been the dialogue here, has been the question is, how do we come together? How do we work together? So Tansisa, and you at the United Nations have experienced world indigenous issues, but more close to home. That's where your heart is. Treaty 6, Treaty 10 Yananoti, Treaty 5, Treaty 8. So come on in, Willie.
Mustahe. Katamskan na onigan. Istamina. Kipeta onsi. Itsi.
That way.
Nistanigan no te. Anasko magkutawin og semanto. Kutakiska o heuiko ya. Eksoman. Es mama upsia. Geton. Mustaki goyotse. Eksinasko mao. Semanto tahtamina okkapi bikskvetskaya. Kaya te gohan otspego. Kakkiog. Kimamisti hina on geton. Ekisksumiek pego makichoitsigan. Kaki asotama to kegi asotama goya ket kema asko kituana apu. Pama to na atitsi atamago kichoitsigauna treaties. Kaki tpahage go mai nipi. Sipia kam pa kam choake. Kaki skoeke go pisem. Sipia kam paeke go. Tapskutso kianom. Maskusia ko pigi mana atite mausaguna mak tana tuiko ya kegoni kakit paike hugunsto egiskotao ye apsis nista nimieiten magani sugi go no teats motasmos atagun stamaya umana ge sika tega ya mama wato skeogam ati United Nations sigatamak apsi sektevi atsmusian tan sumasquads kape mamopi kepti hitasui kian ohtse ektotsini gan magan gatsmon agamaski keki ntomgoyan pego keteg mamoptik magigananto ketektame kewi aga simuan itsetet kapu mogin stotagonog apuhaya uskaek Exapsise, Natsimos Magui Haga Simuan. Excuse me. Thank you very much for this opportunity to join a very, very important dialogue and discussions as I was listening, for example, about our relationships as families and as nations. I'll come back to that. I want to start with a story of an experience I had during one of my United Nations meetings in Guatemala. You will all remember our Mayan brothers and sisters. They had a calendar that was 5,000 years old. And when it was coming to an end, they had a sacred ceremony, an all-night ceremony, for example, that I was asked to witness. And they made 4 prophecies to close the 5,000-year calendar, but to open the new calendar. So when the sun went down at sundown, they said in song and prayer, goodbye, the grandfather sun. And through the night, 4 sacred spiritual leaders spoke at a all-night fire ceremony, waiting for baby sun to come up to open the new calendar. During that ceremony, they made 4 prophecies. And I'm sharing this story because of the last bit of information that I was listening to. The prophecies from the spiritual leaders, when they welcomed baby son for the new calendar, they said things will get better for indigenous peoples before things happen. So during the night, these 4 prophecies were told. And the first one was, things will get better if spirituality comes back to leadership. And it was curious how they phrased that. Spirituality must come back to leadership. And this morning here, for example, where we are acknowledging and celebrating the National Indigenous Peoples Day, there were 2 pipe ceremonies. And one was women pipe, and another one was men and women, and tomorrow morning there'll be another one. So spirituality must come back to leadership, they said. And I wanted to relate those 2 with this morning's prayer ceremonies. that we have been living this way all these eons and generations of history. So we know that. But they're still praying that we will return to spirituality. The second prophecy they made for things to get better was indigenous women, or women in general, must take a more prominent role in leadership. So our women, I think, across the nation, as I witness it, are really stepping up to that prophecy because they're taking very, very important leadership roles. So I'm witnessing these prophecy unfold in front of me. The third one, they talked about things will get better if we build on the strengths of our people. They said, on a side note, we're so used to and always trying to bring each other down. We put each other down. But as one of our spiritual elders said years ago, it's time to lift each other up. Of pintutan, of pintok, of pintoin. We start say histo it's kiteg. So let's build on the strengths of our people, whether it's First Nations, Métis, or Inuit. That's a very important instruction for all of us. But the last one, the fourth prophecy, they said was going to be very, very important. And this is what triggered my memory when I was listening. And I listened to previous of your gatherings. The fourth one, they said, things will get better for us as indigenous peoples in this next 5,000 years with the new calendar and new energy. If the three are acknowledged, the first three, and the last one being unity, things will get better for us with unity. But it won't be easy, they said. So that's a challenge to all of us, I guess, to when we focus on that, realizing, yes, it may be difficult, yes, it may be challenges, but we can't give up. We have to work towards a unified voice, a unified gathering, just unity among our peoples, tribes, and nations. So I thought I'd start with those four stories. Now to go back to the second little update I wanted to give from the United Nations, because you've discussed this before, and that was on the challenges we have with health, the right to health, for example. I was trying to speak real fast one time. My friend Rick, I was at a conference, and I was speaking about health, and I said, you know, my people have two very important, serious challenges. And I said, it's diabetes. I said, what did I just say? I think I might have created a new word. I thought diabetes. What I was trying to say was diabetes and obesity. So to respect your time, I'm going to zero in on, oh, by the way, I created another new word. Rick. I was at a school principals gathering, and they were talking about reconciliation. And of course, I was called on to speak on the calls to action, that Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which I was a part of when we made these calls to action. So I was telling the school principals, and finally, this is all about reconciliation. Heavy emphasis on the action. I thought, well, anyway, that word's being used now more and more, so I'm grateful for that. So at the UN, one of the agenda items this past hearing, that past session, on the 23rd session of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues that was held in New York in April, one of the agenda items was health. And of course, our delegation wanted to propose consideration when we talk about the right to health to ensure that the medicine chest clause of Treaty 6 is mentioned in those discussions. Because it took us years to convince the World Health Organization that there is such a thing as a medicine chest clause under treaty. And by the way, it's not restricted to Treaty 6. Oh, people, I sometimes hear it was meant to apply to all the numbered treaties, for example. Just because it's in one doesn't mean it's excluding the others. So we wanted to encourage the UN to introduce treaty right to health into their discussions and into their report. After the UN had a meeting on it years ago, the World Health Organization in Geneva passed a declaration, a Geneva Declaration on the rights of indigenous peoples to health. And in that report, they included treaty right to health. The special rapporteur on the right to health also included, after several meetings and discussions, the treaty right to health. And he mentioned that in New York at the third United Nations committee meeting. So we were trying to encourage the Permanent Forum, our own forum in New York, just this past month and a half ago now, I guess, to include the treaty right to health. Unfortunately, they took a path instead to say it should be a rights-based approach. So they didn't specifically reference the medicine chest clause as part of a right to health under treaty. But we didn't give up. We sent them another letter following up on that preliminary report. So we're waiting for the final draft to see how it comes out, whether or not they will include that reference. So I just wanted to update your listeners and your participants. The third aspect I wanted to cover is a new declaration. Given the world conflict right now, 57 of us were called into Washington again in April, on April 11 and 12, to discuss peace globally. Because if you remember, some of you will remember, I proposed a resolution at the December Assembly of First Nations Chiefs gathering to pass a resolution on an immediate and permanent ceasefire in the conflict in Israel and Gaza and Palestine, because we were concerned about, at that time, and it's higher now, of 8,000 indigenous children being killed. Not indigenous, I'm sorry, children, some of whom were indigenous. And then there were, I think, 18,000 women at that point. I believe it's now something like 27,000. Nevertheless, the number isn't important. One is bad enough when there's this death because of conflict and war. So the chiefs agreed to adopt a resolution calling for a permanent ceasefire. So in April, 50 of us were called to Washington to discuss that further on how could we utilize indigenous approaches to peace. So I was called on to bring an example of 1877 adhesion to the 1876 Treaty Number 6. Because in that treaty, as you know, there's specific words about peace and goodwill being a purpose of the treaty, peace and goodwill. Some people refer to that as peace and friendship treaty. But also importantly, the word consent appears in that treaty already. Through the wisdom of our forefathers, they included that important right to consent. And when you tie these two together, I proposed that here was one model. I said it's not the perfect or specific and only model. But if we're talking about trying to resolve wars, and by the way, there's over 100 wars going on right now, over 100. We hear about 5 of them probably on daily television broadcasts, but there are actually over 100. And the sad part of that is over 80% of those wars, that conflicts that are going on right now, on our indigenous territories. And that fact is not being well broadcasted in a sense. So I'm concerned when there's conflict in Russia and Ukraine or Israel or Haiti or the Sudan, the indigenous voice is missing. No one is speaking for our indigenous brothers in the Ukraine or in Russia or in Palestine and elsewhere with these conflicts. So I pulled up Treaty 6 as one model, an old model, yes, but nevertheless, our people, our ancestors already were concerned about war and conflict and instead wanted to promote peace. and goodwill. So a new international declaration was passed in Washington, an international declaration on indigenous peoples' peace building. So we presented that at the United Nations in April, not only to the Permanent Forum, Indigenous gathering of 2,800 delegates. We went to the Secretary General's office to speak with the Undersecretary for Peace, and we submitted that international declaration for peace building. Because last week, Prime Minister Trudeau was speaking at a peace summit, as you know, in Switzerland. And I was hoping that declaration could have been referenced. Sadly, it wasn't, probably lack of awareness. But people globally are now coming back to us to ask us, how can we settle peace in the world? What are your experiences? What are your ways, indigenous people's ways to resolve conflict? So I thought I would share that with you because that's an important point of others around the world coming back to indigenous wisdom to resolve conflict, much as they did with climate change and environment. I remember the first meeting, and I'll close with this. At the first meeting on the right to environment, there was a lot of resistance. Many states leaders said there's no such thing as a right to environment. So we called on one of our elders to speak to the UN. And when he got up to speak, he said, "Thank you very much. I just want to ask you," and he said, pointed to the leaders, almost 200 leaders of the world gathered at the UN. He said, "Who among you is going to argue for my brother, the fish that swims in the waters? Who among you is going to argue for the bird, my brother, the bird that flies in the skies? Who among you is going to argue for clean water? And who is going to argue for clean air?" And then he sat down, and you could hear a pin drop after that elder spoke. And the next week, climate change discussions started at the UN. Thank you to our indigenous elders, wisdom keepers, for bringing in that solution to the world. That's where we are today, discussing climate change, environmental disasters. That came from one of our own spiritual elders at the UN. The other one, I was going to close with that, but I thought of another one. I ask people sometimes, have you ever heard a language die? Have you heard a language die? I did. Because the UN Secretary General came to a meeting one day and he said, one indigenous language dies every 2 weeks. Somewhere around the world, an indigenous language dies every 2 weeks. So we were at a meeting and we were having trouble. And somebody made an observation that we had not started our meeting with a prayer and invocation. So I was asked to go to the old man, gave him protocol, and I said, "Could you please restart our meeting with an opening prayer?" He said, "I'd be honored." So when he got the floor, my brother Rick, he said this: "Listen to the sound of my voice. Listen very carefully to the words I'm going to use, because I am the last living speaker of our language on Mother Earth." And he went on to pray for us in his language. A month later, I got a call, and the person at the other end of the line said, "Willie, the old man died." And I said, "What old man?" "Remember the old man that prayed for us at the UN?" I said, "Yeah, he died," he said. It was like somebody took a fist and hit me right in the gut, because I heard one of our languages die. So this decade that we're celebrating now, the decade of indigenous languages, we must make every effort to continue what you're doing. You're doing a discussion on a sacred gift of water in our language, keeping our language alive. And I want to thank you for that. I appreciate that so much, because it reminds me of a day that I heard one of our languages die at the UN. So I was asked to go and ask the chairman of the meeting, can we open the meeting at the UN with a prayer? And she said to me, Mr. Littlechild, you know we don't pray at the UN. I said, well, it's a Thanksgiving and it's invocation. And she says, and how long is that going to take? She said, I'll give you 3 minutes. I said, okay, thank you. So I went back to the meeting and I said, we can open a meeting with a prayer at the UN. And you know what happened? 4 elders, this is how Great Spirit works in mysterious ways. 4 elders had brought their hand drums. So we asked them, protocol, to open a meeting with a prayer song. So they're up there, they got the floor and they're singing, you know, the prayer song. Yeah, hey, hey, hey. She poked me on the side and said, Mr. Littlechild, how long? It's 7 minutes already, she said. I said, you got to let him finish, let him finish. So she did. But you know what, Rick, my brother, and all those listening and watching, the UN is used to working with 5 rights, 5 bundles of rights: economic rights, social rights, cultural rights, civil rights, and political rights. But after that opening prayer, each meeting now at the UN, when we have a meeting, opens with a prayer. And there's a 6th right, a new right of spirituality. And it's referenced in the Organization of American States, for example, OAS Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. There's a specific article not only on languages and our laws and our family, but also on spirituality. So this new human right being recognized is another gift of our people to the world. And I'm telling you this, I guess, partly because it's Indigenous Day, but also it's Indigenous History Month. And these contributions of our people to humankind at the United Nations should be known about by especially our children in schools. It's our people that brought consciousness to the environment, clean air and clean water, protect the animals that die so that we can live. It's our Indigenous spiritual leaders that brought the new right to spirituality that humankind is now benefiting from. So the UN meetings that have been going on, and there's another one coming up on constitutions and laws, are crucially important because the treaty, we always bring that up because we're instructed to raise our treaty, the 4 elements of treaty. We always make sure that the global community hears and knows about them. And that's why I appreciate when I open up with the treaty right to water, NIPI. Some people call it NIPI, but our elders say it's actually Nia Pimatsoin. I am life giver. That's what water, in our perspective, is. They shorten it down to NIPI, but it's Nia Pimatsoin. I am life giver. That's why this meeting on water and rivers, the gathering, is so critically important by and using our language. And I apologize, I'm using a borrowed language, but I wanted to address also the youth who may be listening and have been challenging themselves to regain their language so that our languages don't suffer the same consequence. So with that, I really apologize. I'm taking so much of your time, Rick, and I thought I would join. I've been listening to your previous, through radio, your previous gatherings, and I really appreciate what you're doing. Hey, kinanaskum no, gakio.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for logging on. It's your involvement and your perspective and exactly what you're talking about with the 4 prophecies. That's what we've been trying to figure out. How do we come together? How can we come together?
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the disruption of our relations between our nations was a colonial strategy. All that of taking our lands, of occupying for empire building, I guess. But one of the significant memories that I have of recent history with you was you and the Pope. And your strategy there was to work on the doctrine of discovery, is what I've known now. And hence, since the Pope has recanted, I'm not sure what the word is of that doctrine, but that whole purpose that you'd have in your life, I guess, in your journey, even protecting us as our human right, because of the doctrine of discovery, looked at us as a natural world, as a, not less than human. But maybe if you can explain that as part of our history here, people have to know that as a foundation. That's what Wayne Samagnus was saying. Our leaders today need to understand our history just so we can guide ourselves, when there's a rough rapids on the lake, that we know we can all paddle towards that portage that could take us safely. But some of these are pitfalls and dangers that were created not by us, but we all have to work together to avert them.
Thank you very much. That's a very, very important question. Let me begin by saying this. I'm going to link it. I think I'm going to link it directly to a new kind of trauma that I learned about through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. When we looked into the horrific stories, listened to them on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we were asked to be very careful, and we were, not to re-traumatize our people in terms of mental health or physical, spiritual health, and so on. So we were very careful to be safe, make sure that our witnesses were safe in their testimonies. But the doctrine of discovery and dispossession kept coming up. Being dispossessed of our parents, being taken away to schools as children, being dispossessed from any understanding or experience of love from parents or grandparents, being dispossessed from the land. As old man said, don't forget, when we were taken away from our parents, we were also taken away from our land. So there's a dispossession trauma, which is a new phrase that I really become to more and more appreciate in these discussions. A dispossession trauma. And maybe that's what our youth, in terms of intergenerational trauma, are experiencing. Because if we were dispossessed from our grandparents and parents and from the land, in fact, one old man said to me, Willie, don't forget, when you go to the bush and you talk to the tree and you've done your protocol of tobacco and so on, that's good. But what's more important, he said to me, yes, it's good to talk to the tree, but listen to the tree. That's what the important part is. Yeah, I said, wow, thank you very much. Talk about wisdom and knowledge from our elders. So this dispossession trauma is, I think, playing itself out still today within our young people and within our adults too, I would say. If we don't understand our trauma that we're going through, maybe it's because of the dispossession trauma that we're experiencing. So when we talk about the doctrine of discovery, we know that it wasn't supposed to apply to us. It was actually supposed to apply to Portugal and Spain and nation states like Portugal and Spain, so that when they came to a new territory, a new lands, a new nation or country, then they would plant their flag. That's how they claimed that territory, through their custom and tradition. So we've been suffering this doctrine of discovery through this dispossession trauma, I think, when I'm trying to link the two. So it was important then, when we met with His Holiness Pope Francis. And by the way, I was asked to come to his first inaugural Mass as a Pope in Rome at the Vatican. And as I was listening to him in his first homily, his first public prayer, and I closed my eyes, and when he spoke, he was speaking like one of our elders, I thought. And I thought, he's the one. He's the one that's going to apologize to us. Because he talked about protecting Mother Earth, protecting animals, and protecting each other when he was giving his homily. And I thought, we've heard that already from our elders. So maybe he's the one that'll come and apologize to our people for the traumas and all the horrific abuses our children suffered during the Indian residential school era. So I came home that day thinking, yes, more and more, I thought, he's the one. So I went with a delegation back to the Vatican for an audience. And when I gifted him a traditional vest, I asked him to come to Canada. And he didn't answer me, but what he said was, pray for me. So I went away. About a year later, I went back again on a venture called The Long Walk to Rome. Again, some leaders, spiritual leaders came together. And we had an audience with His Holiness. The first time we were taken over to a pontifical council, which was an advisory body to His Holiness, the Pope. And when I talked about the residential schools, I had a photograph of my school. So I showed it to them, and we were given half an hour. That's the audience time we had with the Pontifical Council. So I shared with them the photos of my school. I talked about my own personal journey in residential school. And they were kind of enthralled about something they had never heard about. They said it was the residential school history. So a couple of hours later, this half hour, we closed the meeting and we thanked each other for the opportunity. So next time was in Washington. When he came to Washington, I was in a, a waiting line. I was told, don't get your hopes up because there's a lot of people who want to see him. So I couldn't get an audience with him in Washington. So he came back to Minnesota. I tried again and couldn't. So we went back one more time to Rome. And it was the day before my birthday. That's significant in one way, and I'll come to it. But this half-hour audience, he actually gave us 2 days, half a day each for the First Nations, the Métis and Inuit. And my quick story was the day before I had been in Lausanne at the International Olympic Committee office. I had a meeting with the president of the Olympics because I'm an ambassador for the Olympics. And as I was leaving, he said, Willie, say hi to His Holiness Pope Francis. We're buddies, he said. So, okay, I said, I will. So when I had the audience with His Holiness, I said, by the way, I bring greetings from President Bach, because I knew he was a very avid soccer fan. I didn't know Argentina was going to win the World Cup, but the World Cup soccer. So he had a smile on his face when I said it was President Bach from the Olympics. So I knew then we had a little bit of a connection here, I thought, through sport. So we had a good discussion. And I tabled one of the matters that we wanted addressed was, first of all, an apology for the survivors of residential schools who wanted to hear an apology. Many times they said to us, all I want to hear is 3 words, 3 little words or 2 little words. I'm sorry or I am sorry. That's all we want to hear from the head of the Catholic Church, they said. So I invited him for the apology. I invited him to look at the positive role of sport, of all things, in reconciliation, and also the doctrine of discovery, repudiating the doctrine of discovery. Because other faith groups, other religions had done that. They had apologized for their role in residential school history. They had repudiated the doctrine of discovery, which actually dispossessed, I guess, North America, or some people call Turtle Island, from us when Some say Christopher Columbus got lost and he thought he was in India, and we got our name Indians from that. But the serious part of it is the impact of that doctrine of discovery on our peoples by way of dispossession is still being carried out in the streets of our cities today. I'll argue, Rick, that that is still affecting us. So the trauma of dispossession, of something like a doctrine of discovery that allows people from outside to take our land away from us, it's important in a sense of restoring peace, justice, and healing. So these are all bundled together, I think. So it was important that he repudiate the doctrine of discovery, which he did, by the way. And the second thing he did was three things. The very last visit in Iqaluit, he came up with a question. I wonder why Canada always wins the gold medal at the Olympics in hockey. So I thought, okay, from soccer to hockey, we're okay, we're buddies. But seriously, he also raised a point. He said, based on my hearings through this journey of penitential forgiveness, I have come to the conclusion that what I heard and felt was genocide. Genocide. And we'd been asking for that for years. And he came up with that personal conclusion that what he heard, what he saw, what he felt was without doubt genocide. And I thought that was a very, very important message just before he entered his plane to go back to the Vatican, to Rome. So these stories all lumped together with the initial point of the doctrine of discovery and how we need to have that repudiated. But in one hearing, I heard one of the cardinals say to me, we've already repudiated the doctrine of discovery, repealed it in a sense, done away with it. So why aren't you asking for the abolishment of the doctrine of discovery? So I think he was going one step beyond what we were asking for when we said repudiate the doctrine of discovery, get rid of it, terminate it. It's no longer in effect. And he said, well, let's abolish it, he said. So that's still in my mind in terms of what is one of our next steps, maybe, is the abolishment of the doctrine of discovery. So that topic is still very much alive. Yes, some argue it was dealt with 200 years ago. It was terminated by way of repudiation. When that was said to me at the UN in New York, I asked for evidence. Show me a doctrine, a declaration, or a decision in writing when and where was the doctrine of discovery repudiated. So that question is there in New York at the UN when I raised it. So it's a very important point you're embarking on here to search this out a little bit more. By the way, how do we understand it? How do we explain colonialism in our language? So in my own mind, I wasn't clear myself. So I went to Old Man and I said, how do you say colonialism in Cree? Stagazzi said, it's easy. It's a sinanma. Abskozo michus is ktap no michus hatred. Kaipenat takaiwag bisa putkuganatoana. And in English, to the young people, colonialism in Cree, according to Old Man, was like, if you look at a willow tree, it's standing there. And if you bend it and bend it and bend it, at some point, you might break it and it'll be broken. That's colonialism in Cree. But Old Man said, so he did not succeed in breaking our spirits like you would with the colonialism. Yes, if you bend to it and bend to it, you're forced and forced. They might break your spirit, but they haven't. And when that happens, the willow comes back up and it grows into a strong tree. And that's where we regain our strength back, our self-identity, our self-esteem, understanding who we are as a Cree, physically, mentally, culturally, spiritually. So colonialism, doctrine of discovery are bundled together, in my view. And we need to keep this dialogue going with our brothers and sisters on the other side of the table. And let's have a frank discussion and find a way forward so that we have true reconciliation. Hey, hey.
Wow. Great stories, Chief, your position in the UN and your conviction to continue this. And somehow you intertwine sport in this as well. Somehow, some way, the athletics and I guess, to our youth as well today, using your life experience, maybe just share some of the activities, the conviction to be an athlete is similar to what a leader is. And also it opens doors and opportunities, as you said with the Pope, but maybe just a message to the youth of the importance of sport, the athletics, the cultural activities that to continue on Indigenous Peoples Day today. It's this is a message for our youth. In Machif we say la plot You've played ball, you've played all over the world. Maybe just on your athletic side, what kind of advice would you give our young people?
Well, I think on the athletic side, where I come to that is I asked again, old man, I get all my strength and advice from our elders and young people as well. I used to have a children's advisory panel when I was a member of parliament. So I used to ask children questions, and they gave me some really, really important advice as children. So we go to children, go to adults and ask for advice. And old man said, how do you become a Canadian champion? I asked him, and he said, one word, balance. Balance. He said, yeah, that's how you become a Canadian champion. I didn't realize how important that was till later on, when what he was talking about was, if you want to become a champion and win, and it's not about beating somebody else, but winning over yourself, there's 4 elements of life that you have to balance. Your physical, take care of your body, exercise. Your mental, discipline yourself, and be careful what you put into your mind and what you put into your mouth. Cultural, be proud of who you are. Be proud that you're Cree. And lastly, spiritual, of course. That's the fundamental pillar of all these, the 4 walls. If you're weak with one or too much on the other, emphasis on physical or emphasis on cultural, you won't be balanced. If you want to win in life, balance those 4 elements of life: physical, mental, cultural, and spiritual. So I took that formula of winning in life into sport, because sport, I often admit publicly, saved my life as a residential school student. Recently at the University of Toronto graduation, I said, when I was a young boy in residential school and I was being abused in all the usual ways, I used to run at night in the evening and run. And sometimes I was all alone, but sometimes I was just crying while I was running. Other times I was praying that, Lord, don't let me be the one that's going to be assaulted tonight or attacked tonight. So I'd run and come back. And, I started getting a positive feeling from running, what I later called a winning spirit that you feel when you have good physical activity, good exercise. You've shed your tears, you've cleaned your mind, you've prayed while you're running, exercising. So later on in school, I got to be on the hockey team, and then the baseball team, gymnastics team. And the more I participated in those activities, the better I felt and the healthier I got, in a sense. So years back, and I look back at my athletic career in college, and it started at residential school. college, university, post-university. By the way, I still do. At the end of August, I'll be in the Canadian Championships for swimming, Team Alberta. So watch for that old Indian guy in the water in August in Quebec City. But anyway, go back to the youth. Balance those four elements of life. And the physical element through exercise and taking care of your body, make sure to balance with the other three elements in life. It's a formula for winning in life. And that same formula allows you to win in sports. So yes, I've been able to participate in, I think it's 9 different countries and 3 different sports. I'm in 9 sports halls of fame, including Canada Sports Hall of Fame and North American Hall of Fame. But it's not about me, it's about you can do the same thing. I was born on the reserve, grew up on the reserve, 14 years of my life in 3 different residential schools. What made me survive was exercise and prayer. And both of them were possible through sport. So I value the blessing that I was given to realize, to understand what balance means. How do you utilize that in sport and in competition? And guess what? That same formula works for business and education. It's about practice, for example. You practice and practice to be a good athlete. Well, in school, you study and study and study to become a good student. So a good student athlete, you need to balance those both. And you never know. You could become a world champion. I played in 11, I think, world championships in one event, 3 in another one, and 3 in a different one. So 3 sports. I played baseball, for example, one winter in Jamaica for winter ball. And I was teaching lifeguarding for the island that had the highest death rate from drowning from water. So all of these have been blessings that I've received from Great Spirit. But yes, the germs started from abuse in residential school, but I kept feeding it with a positive way out through sport. And I just kept going, still doing. So young people, be active, stay active, take care of your body. Be careful what you put in your mouth. Be careful what you put in your mind. Make sure it's positive. Be proud of who you are and pray. Don't ever be afraid to pray. Old man said there's no wrong way to pray. So there you go. That's the formula of success.
Wow. Well, there's just so much to. I just wanted to ask you, I guess, what do we look forward into the Paris Olympics this year? Paris Olympics is coming up. We have some athletes attending. You'll be probably in attendance, but what day do they start? And just to give a heads up, I know internationally these are the champions that have made it, but if people are inspired and want to see themselves there, the Olympics are a good inspiration for us to set the standard.
Well, I would say the latter is this: participate in your own community or your own nation, say in the provincial championships, or the North American Indigenous Games, the World Indigenous Games, because those are our Olympics. And when you look to the other Olympics, I'm an ambassador for the Olympic Winter Games, for example. Yes, I will be in Paris. And by the way, we have a swimmer on Team Canada from the Blood Reserve in Alberta. So be on the lookout for him in the water. I hope to see him because I'll be speaking in Paris a day before the opening ceremonies. And what I'm going to be talking about is a declaration I drafted. I drafted a declaration for the United Nations on the participation of Indigenous peoples in sport to advance reconciliation. So you might see me tonight if you're watching the 6th game of Stanley Cup to open the game tonight between the Oilers and the other team. But in the declaration, I proposed utilizing sport to advance reconciliation, and the UN adopted it. So it went to the Commonwealth Games Society meeting. The Commonwealth Games Society in Africa unanimously adopted a sport declaration that I drafted to ensure the participation of Indigenous peoples in sport to advance reconciliation. And the sporting community of the Commonwealth countries, at their annual assembly, unanimously adopted that declaration. So in Paris, I'll be going back to talk more to the Commonwealth Games countries to advance this declaration so that more and more of you children, you youth will have an opportunity to place yourself in the highest level of competition. If that's one of your desires and one of your goals, it's possible. So what I'm going to hopefully do is encourage the Olympic Committee to also adopt this declaration on the participation of Indigenous peoples in sport to advance reconciliation. And that's what I'll be talking about in Paris just before the opening ceremonies. I think the day before, which will be, I think I speak on the 25th. 26th will be the opening until August 3rd. So yes, watch out for the Olympic athletes and see how they've gotten to that point and how they conduct themselves under the heat of competition.
Yeah, that work doesn't stop for you, eh? I'm gonna say. I just want to open it up to the other participants. If there's any questions for Willie, feel free to raise your hand or come on in. Gerald, there's Wayne, Candace, but there's people listening through FM radio over here through Pine House, Alacross, and Beauval. And we can't say enough of the work that you've done up to now, Willie. It's tonight the Oilers will be on, and you're welcome to Treaty 6 and into the Edmonton Rogers Place. You will be heard all over the world. The whole world will be watching this Stanley Cup playoffs, and it just does us proud that you're keeping our languages alive, and also the nobility and the humble way that you conduct yourself. We are so proud and thankful for the work you've done and the conviction you've made to represent our people.
Hey.
Gerald, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't have a question, just a comment. Thank you, Willie, for all the work that you do. I've listened to you at various times over the years, and I often wonder if you get to spend any time with yourself or your family. You're such a busy person. You represent us on so many different bodies, but as far as I'm concerned, we couldn't have a better person representing us. So I'm very proud of the things that you do, and you're very good at what you do, and for our people. I thank you very much, Willie, for everything that you do for us. Thank you. Masih.
Thank you. Hi.
Candace, anything you'd like to add or convey? Candace Paul is from English River Dene Nation here, so
I really, appreciate your words. I've never actually heard you speak before, or did I? Once you were on with us in the pandemic, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Right. So yes, but today, the words you spoke about, the bending willow and how it'll grow back anew, and just those words about, be careful what you put in your mouth and in your mind. Those are so important at this time. It's because our people are really feeling quite broken right now. We're dealing with a lot of the colonial impacts, and we're just starting the process of looking at all these things that impacted from contact to now, and what we lost and what we need to bring back. And sadly, in our communities, the language isn't being spoken. We're not hearing it. And yet, like yesterday, my little grandson was adamant, I'm a Dene,
Good.
and he's doing that. And, all of these things that we have to do I'm really grateful you're standing in there for us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Wayne, yeah, pitsi tigista. I don't know if you're still on out there.
Yeah, but so then last some Willie kapi was going. I asked a long time ago. There was Indigenous Games in Denver, and I saw this old. Even back then, he was old swimming competition. Kami ko gitiga na sino kampata tiga itimata tiga sisti ko so gitmed piegi itimata. I saw him swimming in the competition and he did good. So yeah, I'm very glad that you can speak for all. You do speak for all of us, and I'm very glad we have that great voice out there. And that's something so squat kami mo.
Apoy hay, apoy kinaskup na nista.
Well, we usually close off with a prayer, Willie. There's nothing I can say or ask anybody else to contribute. I think the gift you've given us of your knowledge, your experience, and your perspectives of even that, like we mentioned, the willow and your reference to colonialism. But the four prophecies of the Mayan is so, well, it's enheartening. That's you lifted up my spirit just knowing that we're not giving up. There is hope. So I'd like to ask you to maybe close off our prayer or a thank you prayer. I shouldn't say a closing prayer because we're going to continue tomorrow. But feel free to join us at any time. Tomorrow we're going to have Pearl Callahayson will be joining us from Northern Alberta. And we just want to see the experience of the Arctic Winter Games. Northern Saskatchewan here qualifies as a circumpolar community. And those games are international. So if we can expose our children, our youth, to showcase their sport and athletic and the culture, because there's Dene games, there's Inuit games. Maybe someday we'll get Cree and Métis games involved in these Arctic games. But Saskatchewan is yearning to be involved in this. And that's what we're calling on Pearl Callahayson to share how they prepare their kids for those athletics. But today, I can't say enough for the work that you do and continue to do. And I can't believe you're still athletically competing. And it's an inspiration. I always thought retirement was something to lay low, but you just shift gears. You're just
Yeah.
If you could have a thank you prayer for us, I think Agagi Simwin, it's so strong. It's number one on the prophecy, is bringing spirituality back, and that's exactly what Gerald, Candace, all the speakers this week have touched on, the sacredness of the responsibility we have.
Well, before I ask you all to join me in your own way, I drafted the Constitution for the Arctic Winter Games way back. I can't remember. The first one was in Yukon. I drafted the Constitution for those games. And the reason I mention that is sometimes we focus a lot on sport, and not enough on traditional games. So when I was helping draft the United Nations Declaration on Rights of Indigenous Peoples, if you look at Article 31 of the UN Declaration, the right to manifest our culture includes sports and traditional games. So it's an international law that's been accepted globally that we have a right to sport, but importantly, we have also a right to our own traditional games. So I mentioned that in connection with the Arctic Games and also the other games. So, but with that, I ask you to join me. So let's go each hina kisto dansan magets na tagis na naskuma kano sumsta he. Keso im go akota Wa we so my kis kau pinamik. So koe no gota so is kam gota. Dansan magets na kiano is matsiak is so im gosiak. Kikpak ngoson geton. Ekse wicheg. Ilanas kumano gotain og semanto. Igo kumsta semina. Isoim goyak. Ehina magoyak. Miayawan tapamato yakota witnak. Kigawi nawaski. Kalagate mayak. Kigawi na kalagate tamak. Kigawi nawaski. Ilanas kumano ne wayakoche. Gotawi no. Isagaste no. Kami noche. Ilanas kumani. Otak semanto idok. Isoimia. Apitogui. Piskano. Tenina. Okteotse. Ilanas kumana. Asniwa chik. Tehkeuse. Temi noche. Ilanas kumani. Ketegra kipaksemot. Matesa. Gis. Soksinan tapskutsohi. Asniwatsia. Kiwet nok mina. Okteotse. Naskumon nota me oikots. Kaki inamauja tapskutso uspagan. Tansan magetsna tris. Matsiak. Kuitna. Naskumon. Kokum no mina. Kiteasni. Skuteo. Eguni mina. Kupinenis na naskumoa. Ekse kiuettamasuk mi ajawen. Kiuettamasuk koeskse. Maat songi kane goimgorat saatskse manto. Akka mei mogom tuntameg. Akka mei mutaan. Eksamens. Eksemtaan otaakse manto toitsihia soimnan. Kagege naootsi penaga temia. Temin nigan kiam wapakin nami wanskana otaakse manto hei.
Hey.
Hey.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've been listening to special guests, Chief Wilton Littlechild, Chief Wayne Samaganus, President Gerald Morin, Vice President Marianne Morin. These are former positions and continued conviction by our leaders and continued work to inspire and to encourage to find a good way of living. And that river of life that we all experience, our canoes, as the Turo Wampum proudly shows that we have our bundle of rights, we have our canoe, but we respect everybody else's. And that it's our responsibility to keep our canoe afloat, our languages, our spirituality intact, and our relationships with our kin and all our relations. So a beautiful day to spend with you, at each and every one of you. Candace, I thank you for partaking in these and giving us that consciousness of and perspectives that we always need. And we'll all cheer for the Edmonton Oilers tonight to get that Stanley Cup going. I see Willie wears the Oiler colors today.
Yep.
So thank you. And we've been listening on CIPI radio here at Beauval. We were on CILX radio in Isle La Crosse, CFNK radio in Pine House, and all the streaming services. We wish everybody a National Indigenous Peoples Day. And every day is a National Indigenous Peoples Day because we want to make it better and the relationships with the world. Hey.
Kapwe.
Masi. Hey.
We'll continue again tomorrow at 1 o'clock, and we'll close off our river gathering with other guests that can make it with us. And those of you that want to respond and partake, this is an open dialogue. You can log on to our website, if you have CIPI Radio on Facebook, you can find us on Facebook as well. And there's a QR code. You just have to touch the QR code and it'll link you through Safari right to our Zoom meeting. So people are welcome to take part and respond or act or share on the topics we've been discussing, or raise questions that may have confused you, or we can help you clarify some of the thoughts that people have shared. We can try. With that, today, we'll wish everybody a happy National Indigenous Peoples Day and say all our relations.